Hello, welcome back to the NOTCAST. It's been about a week since the last one. It's Monday, I think the 27th of January, 2025. Good Lord, time is marching on, isn't it? And today I am going to be talking about Morrissey and however many solo albums this is. Southpaw Grammar, released 30 years ago. Good God, I feel old when I think about it like that. But at the same point, surely it's not 30. It's only about 5 years since Southpaw Grammar came out, isn't it? Not like a third of a century. Technically a third of a century is 1992, but it still doesn't feel like that long at all, because the concept of time over time, obviously with streaming and so on, has collapsed into the point where linearity doesn't really exist anymore. Life is just stuff, and if something happened in 1995 or 2025, it doesn't really matter unless you're doing a commemorative box set of outtakes, which there isn't, by the way, for most of the Morrissey albums. In fact, his solo career has, I think, been underserved by reissues. And it's been about a week since I've done one of these. The reason being, it's been pretty busy. So there's a big thing happening in my day job. I have a day job. Unsurprisingly, the money from literally dozens of people watching these doesn't go very far. In fact, I've not made a penny out of doing these, so I'm definitely working under minimum wage. And there's some new regulations that come into effect in the middle or late February in my work, and that means I have to, rewrite and redesign absolutely everything to comply with the legislation and the regulation, and to make sure that it's as good as it's got. There are only 669 pages of guidance which I have to read, by the way. There's only 48 documents and guidance documents that I have to read. It's a lot, and that's not even including the legislation and regulation itself. So that's taking up a lot of my time. And there's a couple of other things that are happening in my so-called life, which are taking up time, and also going out a little bit as well. But that's another completely different conversation. Obviously, I started doing these because I never left the house, and now that I do leave the house, I still do them. And I'm wondering sometimes, as somebody said to George Best, I think, where did it all go wrong? Well, who knows? Who knows indeed? And certainly for Morrissey, I think this period with the Southpaw Grammar album is where it started to go a little bit wrong. Now, those of you on morrisseysolo.com who have spotted me, thank you for your attention. I will not be holding back in some of my opinions as I go through Morrissey's discography. What I will say about Southpaw Grammar is that it has aged very, very well. There are still, in my opinion, business decisions, artistic decisions and creative decisions that are less than perfect. And one of the risks of being a solo artist is, of course, when your best friend is on the payroll, is that you are surrounded by people that tell you that every idea that you have is great, and also by a culture where if you tell somebody that what they're thinking or their idea isn't great, you could actually be putting your employment on the line. And it comes to a point where you kind of think, either you surround yourself with people that are full of brilliant ideas and they work together to empower you, or you surround yourself with people that tell you you're absolutely amazing, and then you surround yourself with people that are yes men. And in my opinion, the number of solo artists have reached that point. Prince definitely reached that point at a certain point in his career. I think Morrissey, much later in his career, found less people pushing against him over time. And that really creates a monotony of vision, I think it's fair to say, and it becomes quite dull, really, if you're not careful, because you end up being in a situation where everything you think is amazing and everything everybody else does is atrocious, and that you are a genius, beset and surrounded by morons on every side, which, if you read Morrissey's autobiography, is the feeling that you get when I read parts of this, is that he is a genius surrounded by morons who want to achieve sabotage against him for reasons that we can't work out. Normally people think, jealousy, but I don't think it is that. I think sometimes a good old healthy dose of paranoia will feed into that. So we start this period with his solo single, the first fruits of the post-Vauxhall and I era boxers. So I think this was something like his 12th, 13th solo single, possibly more, and charted at the grand old number of, I think it was number 18, I think, in the UK. It didn't do vastly well, and it was also the first Morrissey solo release not to have his face on the cover, apart from Interlude, which obviously is Morrissey and Susie. And this is a boxer, unsurprisingly, who I think his name is... No, it's gone. It's written on a bit of paper over here. But I'm sure it'll come to me in a minute. And this is a lovely 3-song EP, actually. I really, really rate this. This is probably the last truly perfect Morrissey single, because sometimes some of the B-sides are amazing. But this is 3 songs taken from some recording sessions and some leftovers that were turned into an EP. It was originally going to be 4 songs. There was originally going to be an extra track on there. It tells the story of, I think, and supports Morrissey's February 1995 UK tour, which I saw 2 shows on. Hot on the heels of Vauxhall and I, Moz had gone into the studio at Miraval in December 1994, just before this tour took place. And Miraval was a studio in Nice in France. The weather is probably very nice, but Morrissey only stayed there for 24 hours. So he flew into the studio with his 3rd choice producer. I think he wanted Chris Thomas and wasn't successful. And I think there was somebody else that he asked who wasn't available. So he asked Steve Lillywhite, who was also produced a number of other tracks, including, I think, a fair chunk of U2, but also Vauxhall and I to produce. And so having a 3rd choice producer means that sometimes you get an album that perhaps isn't quite exactly what you want it to be. And the sessions at Miraval didn't go particularly well. As I said, kind of Morrissey turned around and left within 24 hours because there was no central heating, and the chances of any vegetarian food was extremely very small indeed. But with him not around, the band that was recording, which was Alan, Boz, Spencer and Johnny Bridgewood, recorded a number of instrumental tracks. And they were called The Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils, The Reader Me Author, Boy Racer, Dagenham Dave, Best Friend on the Payroll. No, I think it's, what is it? Nobody Loves You, Nobody Loves Us. I should know this, actually, because it's a fantastic B-side. Yeah, Nobody Loves Us. Laughing Ann, You Should Have Been Nice to Me, and Honey, You Know Where to Find Me were recorded in instrumental form that were then taken back to the other recording studio in Hook End for Morrissey's vocals and re-recording. And some of those tracks from Miraval do circulate. There's acoustic versions and demos of a number of the tracks. Some of them very good, some of them very basic and obvious. But the problem was with the recordings is that Morrissey's tape player was playing at the wrong speed. So Morrissey had written the songs to the speed that the songs weren't. And so therefore there was an issue with key. There was an issue with moving the songs into the way that the songs had been written and trying to find a middle ground between that. Which I'm always reminded, by the way, of Van Halen's live album, Right Here, Right Now, where the band went into the studio, more correctly, Alex and Eddie went into the studio and recorded over the top of the video footage. And then what they found was that the vocals didn't match because the vocals were in a different performance. So they got Sammy Hagar back into the studio to re-record vocals over the new guitar, bass and drums that was going to the soundtrack of the DVD/VHS, effectively creating a live album that never existed for a show that never happened, but using visuals from a show that did happen. So they filmed a live show and then created the soundtrack for the live show afterwards. Confusing. Yes, it is. But a lot of things about Van Halen's career often are, and I'm by no means an expert on that band, thank God, because otherwise I'd have to open all of my podcasts by doing the Sammy Hagar introduction to, I think, Get Up and going, "Hello, baby," which I think is the opening song on 5150 or OU812. Who? G-A-F, indeed, about VH. So Mozzie's tape player was playing at the wrong speed. And that meant that everything written was in the wrong key and the sessions weren't working, and so they had to be scrapped. And Woody Taylor, who was the drummer on Vauxhall and I, left, and Spencer came back for the recordings, which were in January 1995. And also that just made the material on Southpaw Grammar rockier, heavier, more abrasive, more crunchy. And I've been thinking a lot about crunchy because, frankly, the noise in my head is crunchy, but also when bands perform live, There's a sound very definitely of 4 or 5 musicians there, or if you're in Guns N' Roses, 12 to 2, musicians in a room looking in each other's eyes, making a goddamn racket and playing together. And that's a sense when you listen to Southpaw Grammar. It's not necessarily a sense when you listen to some other material. Specifically, I'm thinking about Pink Floyd's The Final Cut, where it feels like it's 5 people in 5 different rooms at 5 different times playing different things, or perhaps one of them being told, you've got 28 seconds to play a guitar solo, that time will never change, go. And you kind of sat there going, this doesn't feel organic. It feels like being given orders by a superior authority. So the early groundwork for Southpaw Grammar was complete by February 1995. January 1995, so exactly around about now. And I think on the 23rd of January, the single was released, which is Boxers, which I've mentioned before. And here is, by the way, a handbill that was given out at record stores. If you bought your copy of Boxers, the new single released, January the 16th. Sorry, I've missed it. And then a list of shows on the back. Morrissey in person. So the Vauxhall and I tour lasted 18 whole shows only in the UK. You'd have thought after playing arenas in the US and after cancelling Madison Square Garden in 1995, if you've got a live band, maybe one of your impetuses is to go and play live. And that's absolutely not what happened. So between 1992 and 1997, Morrissey spent 5 years not playing America and 5 years not really playing Europe. I think he played Finland in 1995, possibly Helsinki on the Southpaw Grammar Tour, and maybe a couple of shows in Japan. And it was really a very, very poor coverage. So, if you lived in Dusseldorf, for example, Paris, or America, you didn't see Morrissey between December 1992 and May-ish 1997, which is a long time, and that will cost you an audience, because your audience will grow out. So you think about people go to college, that's 3 years of their life. Morrissey toured the year before you went to college. The next time he tours is the year after you graduate. Oasis have been and gone. Nirvana have been and gone. It starts to age out of your fan base, really. And I've got to say, although obviously Morrissey is for life and not just for Christmas, some people with some bands, music is not that big a deal to them. It's just a thing. It's like a movie or television or Silent Witness or the Great British Whinge Off or whatever it is. It's just a thing that happens. And some people just don't stay loyal, Yeah, maybe 1 week they'll go, right, I'll go and see Oasis, and 6 months later they're like, no, I'm not in the mood, and that's sometimes how it is. So the tour supporting Boxers, and I think I'll probably get to the Boxers single first, but the tour felt like Boxers was an excuse to tour, to get the band match fit, to go into the studio. As is often the way, there didn't seem to an outside observer to be much in the way of rhyme or reason for some of the decisions that were being made around that. Boxers is a great song. It picks up, and it's the first time that Morrissey really talked about it, I think, in any tangible way, apart from possibly things like We'll Let You Know and the National Front Disco. It talks about the concept of belonging, being in a gang, concepts of masculinity and the identity of what it is to be a man, how people would interpret and bring to the masculine identity their own ideas about what a man should be, or as the song went, tell me what it takes, what makes a man, as the song goes. But the idea that you have to be hard but soft, you have to be tender but brutal, the idea that you have to be physical yet somehow mental at the same point. I mean mental in a thinky way, not mental in a way. And those are the kind of things that these songs, and Southpaw Grammar especially, start to address, is the concept of the masculine identity in a world where perhaps it's uncertain who or what you should be. The second song on the album after Boxers, and Boxers is a great song, but the second song is Have a Go Merchant, and then Whatever Happens, I Love You. And both of those songs one, Have a Go Merchant, is an interesting title. So if someone has a go, sometimes, especially towards closing time on a Friday, you could think that would be the activity of someone that's a little bit loud, a little bit aggressive, and not taking no for an answer. And it's a more than good song, Have a Go Merchant. On the set list of the tour, it sat in between Billy Budd and Spring Hill Jim. And it sat there for a reason, which is it could have been on Vauxhall and I, in the same way, pardon me, that Whatever Happens, I Love You, the third song, could have been on Vauxhall and I. These songs are continuations and extrapolations of the core ideas that sit inside Vauxhall and I. The idea of masculine identity, but also the idea of existing in a world where time has moved on beyond you, where perhaps you as a person have an idea about what time is. Or as Grandpa Simpson said, I used to know what it was, and now what it is weird and scary. And because they've changed what it is. So the idea of what it is to be a man, or to be masculine, or to be feminine, or whatever, has changed. And then it's, girls who like boys, who got boys like their girls in it, etc., etc., as the song goes. It is a lovely EP. It is a really essential part of the Morrissey discography, the Boxers EP, and it is one that I would recommend to anybody, actually. And let me just quickly have a look here. It doesn't tell you who the person is, the Boxer, but apparently I did know, and I didn't write it down. So there you are. So Boxers was also seen as a thing for the tour, but it was also seen as the single that promoted a upcoming Morrissey record, and one that is, if I'm very, very blunt, not particularly good. In fact, I go so far as to say I think it might be the only one I haven't got, which is The World of Morrissey. And I think The World of Morrissey is awful. It's really very bad indeed. So bad, I don't have it because I don't need it. If you take the obviously devious, truculent and unreliable tone that is Morrissey's autobiography, he will tell you that World of Morrissey was scuppered, and on the grounds that there were adverts in the British full-page ads in the major music magazines, which, with a printed release date, was in fact a week later than the actual release date. Doesn't matter. That is blame shifting. The reason World of Morrissey didn't sell was because there wasn't enough material on it to justify buying it. It may have taken in the view of a mid-price kind of compilation, which also, by the way, was followed up with a compilation, This Is Morrissey, in I think 2020 or 2021. But there wasn't enough on World of Morrissey to justify buying it. I think there was Have a Go Merchant, maybe Whatever Happens, I Love You, maybe I'd Love To. Boxers, for example, there was a version of, I think, one of the B-sides, the cover version of Moon River. You look at that and you go, you're asking me to pay album price for 4 songs, 5 songs, 6 songs maybe, that weren't on there. And it didn't make sense. It didn't stack up as an album. I listened to World of Morrissey and it just felt to me like a random hodgepodge of songs that had been thrown up in the air and landed in some random order. Whereas Bone and Drag, for example, Morrissey's previous B-side compilation, felt very much to me like an album that had been compiled out of B-sides. The World of Morrissey felt like a random mix together that had been put together in 53 minutes, which is probably in exactly its runtime. Whereas, for example, in the days of the 90s, in 1995, if you wanted to let a girl you know you liked her, you'd probably do a 90-minute mixtape. You'd do hand-drawn cover art onto the cassette. You'd pick the songs with the idea of telling somebody that you like them and you want to hold hands with them in public, right? And that is, that was the degree of care that would go into a mixtape to win the heart of one woman or one man. Whereas for Morrissey and the World of Morrissey, just like, here's some random songs in some random order, and 8 of them are already on albums that you already own. And by the way, Morrissey's only done like 5, 6 albums. He's done Viva Hate, Bone and Drag, Kill Uncle, Your Arsenal, Vauxhall and I. So that's 5 solo albums plus Beethoven Is Death, the live album. So that's 6 albums, and then the 7th album, 8 of the songs are already on the other albums. And if you're voting with your feet, you kind of go, if you'd put all the 14 songs, which should have been on the album, on there, maybe I would have gone for it. So, for example, if it had been Boxers, Have a Go Merchant, Whatever Happens, I Love You, the studio version of Sister, I'm a Poet, My Love Life, I've Changed My Plea to Guilty, The Loop, maybe put That's Entertainment on there, maybe Skinstorm possibly, Let the Right One Slip In, There Speaks a True Friend, obviously Jack the Ripper, maybe You've Had Her, I'd Love To, Moon River, Interludes, and maybe if you wanted to really throw some bait in there, you'd throw 3 unreleased songs which did exist: Sunny, Black Eyed Susan, and A Swallow on My Neck on there. And then you've got 16, 17 solid songs that could have made a decent 6th Morrissey album. But no, you get a compilation of random singles in an order that when listened to feels like someone's just stuck it on shuffle and doesn't care. It's nothing to do with the week of release that's in the full page adverts in the British Inkies, mate. It's all to do with the fact that 65% of the album had already been released on your albums. So you're asking people to pay for a third of an album and pay a full price for it. If it had been a compilation that had sounded like an album full of non-album tracks, you would have sold a lot more copies of World of Morrissey. But you didn't, because the offer wasn't good enough. And as a fan of a band, I make value decisions about what I buy on the basis of what is being offered. I don't feel the obligation to buy anything by anybody, and I frequently don't. There are approximately 1,712 Motorhead compilations I don't have, because all you really need is No Remorse. And if you're a push, The Chase is better than The Catch, which has all the single A and B sides on. You don't need anything else, by the way. You certainly don't need however many Mission hits albums there are, and there seems to be a new one every 3 weeks. The Rolling Stones appear to issue 4 compilation albums a day. You don't need those. So if you're going to put a value proposition out there, you're going to put a product out to market and you're going to ask people to pay for it, compile it with care and attention, which is not what The World of Morrissey is. The World of Morrissey is a piece of shit. Sorry guys, not a good album. And it's a wasted opportunity to create an essential 6th Morrissey studio album, which did not happen. So, deep breath and relax. On to the Boxers tour, which was much, much, much more fun. I saw 2 shows on the Boxers tour. I saw the Birmingham Aston Villa show, which I think was on the 11th of February, and I saw the last show at Drury Lane in London on the 26th of February. And this is a set list from the sound desk, because all the set lists on the stage got trashed at the end of the show. That means that there are 2 official releases from that particular tour, and a number of unofficial ones, of course. But the 2 official releases are, and I go in chronological order, the 1995 sell-through VHS introducing Morrissey, here available in its DVD incarnation. This was mostly shot in Blackpool and Sheffield on the 8th and 9th of February 2025. Some additional insert crowd shots were shot at the Birmingham Aston Villa Leisure Centre apparently, but hardly any were used. I haven't seen myself in those crowd shots, but I know I'm there. And this reflects the tour as much as I can remember it. The band was very good. The audiences were between ecstatic and euphoric, depending on your point of view. The set list features nothing that had been played on the Kill Uncle tour. So the oldest song on here was You're the One for Me, Fatty, which was only 2.5 years old at that point. And so the set lists, as we can see here, are Billy Budd, Have a Go Merchant, Spring Hill Gym. Some shows featured London, one of the first Smiths songs to be brought back into Morrissey's set lists. You're the One for Me, Fatty, Boxers, Jack the Ripper, which is of course incredible. We'll Let You Know, which is actually before, and then Whatever Happens, I Love You, Why Don't You Find Out for Yourself, National Front Disco, Moon River, Now My Heart Is Full, Speedway, and Encore. The set list between Drury Lane and Introducing Morrissey does change. So Introducing Morrissey features, I think it features Hold On To Your Friends. It may not do, actually. Yeah, it does. It features Hold On To Your Friends in between Moon River and Boxers, which was Hold On To Your Friends was dropped after the first 2 weeks of the tour. There was a song called Used To Be a Sweet Boy that was played at the first 3 or 4 shows, which again didn't really work. The encore was Shoplifters of the World Unite. The Smith song. And so the idea of Morrissey playing Smith songs, now it's like, well, you're never more than 20 minutes away from a Smith song. At a Morrissey gig. Then the idea that he would ever sing a Smith song again seemed bizarre and outlandish and crazy. But he did play Shoplifters of the World Unite at both the shows that I saw. And London, he played in London because it was London. And what an amazing experience it was. So Birmingham I don't have a huge amount of memories about. But Drury Lane, which was released unofficial on The More You Ignore Me, The Closer I Get, an unofficial CD of the original BBC radio broadcast, and later released in full, apart from Shoplifters of the World Unite, on the Vauxhall and I reissue in 2014. This is another Morrissey live album, and it's a fantastic recording. It's a brilliant performance. I wish it was released on vinyl. It's very, 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 very good indeed. And I remember when we went into Drury Lane, and I kind of knew what was going to be happening. My friends Mike and Mark were there as well. Mike, who I haven't seen in about 20 years, and Mark I haven't seen in a year, on the grounds that we all live in different parts of the country. And walked into this old London theatre from the 1800s with a massive unexploded bomb that was put in the centrepiece of the entrance hall, the atrium, I think is the word, that had gone through the ceiling and not detonated in the Second World War. Walked into that, and it's, like the Drury Lane Theatre is somewhere that, for example, would be very similar to the Palladium, an old-fashioned classical theatre for pantomime and children's shows. And of course, you could shout at Morrissey behind you, and he'd just know that you were talking about the drummer. But that's not the point right now. This was an event of a show, and it was the last show of the tour. It was the last time that I saw Morrissey for 4.5 years. It was an incredible show, and we didn't know he was going to play London. I'll be blunt. We'd been to the pub. We'd had a drink or two before. We were a little bit steaming because I was 21 at the time, and I had, I threw caution and breakfast to the winds as I went along, and that was how I lived at that point. So I didn't really know. I thought I was going to get You're the One for Me Fatty, and then there was that boomf, and suddenly London was being played in London by Morrissey's band. We were like in the 5th, 6th row or something. It was a very seated show, and it was astronomical the way in which suddenly the venue transfixed from something that was quite classical and quite reverent to this melee of 20-somethings pouring out feelings, seeing a Smith song played live for the first time in nearly 10 years, possibly longer than that, actually, because remember, if you hadn't seen Morrissey before then, this was the first show on the tour you'd seen. The first time you knew he was playing a Smith song was when he was playing a Smith song, and that song was London, in London, by his band from London. A bold move, and really ripped the roof, not figuratively, or well, not literally, but figuratively, off the Drury Lane Theatre. And so, wow, what an experience. Absolutely love that show. It was brilliant. The show was brought to a perhaps premature end. And the reason it was brought to a premature end was simply because Shoplifters of the World Unite, he said something that encouraged the crowd to get on the stage. And so many people got from the crowd into the stage and onto the stage that, things got unplugged. Sound stopped happening. Drums stopped being played. And after the Dallas riot in 1991 captured on Morrissey Live in Dallas, the decision had been is that if the stage was flooded with stage invaders and you couldn't perform, is don't power the song through, stop and end the show, which was the right move from a safety perspective. So that was the Drury Lane show, which, by the way, was wonderful. And I'm sure some of you watching this, and at least a couple of people I know in so-called real life, were at that show as well. So if you're watching it, hi Grant, hi Jane, I think you were at that show, and wish I'd known you then, but I don't, so I do now. So there you are. Into the studio, straight after that, came the recording sessions for Southpaw Grammar, starting March 1995 in Hook End Studios. The world has changed since Vauxhall and I, and it's definitely changed since the Smiths. The theory is that the first 10 years of any artist's career are the best, and then everything is a slow decline and downhill. Obviously, the Beatles only really made records for 8 years, but think about the Rolling Stones. Between 1963 and 1973 was the period where almost everybody thinks they did almost all of their best work. The Manic's best work apparently is in the first 10 years. Pink Floyd's work between about 1967 and 1979 is generally regarded as the best by most people that don't listen to enough Pink Floyd albums. Most bands, their first 10 years are the ones which are regarded as the best. And Morrissey's 10 years came to an end in March 1995 when he recorded Southpaw Grammar. Not that I think he went off the boil at this point. I'm talking about popular perception. Culture moves on. The world changes. Everything had gone a little bit Britpop. It was pretty obvious that Morrissey was from the old guard there, the previous generation, and up and coming with the Pulps and the Blurs and the Suedes and the Oasises and the Jeans and all these other bands that were going to come and take over and show the next generation of British indie articulacy made for sensitive boys with feelings and guitars. And this was exactly the wrong environment, I think, for what Southpaw Grammar became. Not because it's a bad album, but it's an album out of time. It's an album that didn't belong to the period in which it was released. The EMI deal had ended with the release of The World of Morrissey, and EMI proposed a new deal to Moz, but with a reduced offer. And his view was, no, well, you can tell how seriously I'm going to be taken by how good the offer is from the label. And so he didn't sign. There was a deal with Reprise, the American label, which did include Southpaw Grammar, but because Morrissey didn't re-sign with Reprise Records, the label killed the album in America, and it got to number 66 in America, which is detailed in one of the conversations that is in here, which is, I bump into a Reprise executive on a flight to Chicago who doesn't surprise me in the least by revealing, you know, the label deliberately crippled Southpaw Grammar, don't you, because you wouldn't re-sign. And I thought at that moment of Howie Klein's, you know, every time you tour the States, the Smiths catalogue jumps and feel a grinding gut sensation. In Europe, I hastily signed a one-album deal with BMG RCA, bemusing the label at a conference table by overseeing the deal with no legal intervention. My smartness backfires on me, though, because I would never earn any royalties from Southpaw Grammar, which enters the UK chart at number 4, and the £200,000 placed up front by the label disappears into recording and producer fees. Tuesday, August 8th, 1995 is the launch of Southpaw Grammar at Terry Venable's Club Scribes West on Kensington High Street. I prepare to leave, but then quickly turn back. I just can't face it. There is too much clattering about inside my head. I stay home and put the kettle on. Suddenly, I am unremunerated, having relied on EMI royalties, which had ceased in 1992, never again to be. So, Morrissey had signed a deal with RCA for £200,000 or £250,000, and because he had no legal representation, he didn't have to pay lawyers and he didn't have to pay managers, so he kept all of that money, but didn't have royalties coming in from EMI. So in order to gain income, had to effectively rely on one of two things. Either he had to sell what he had, which incidentally was the Smiths back catalogue, which he sold for £734,000 to Warner Brothers, or he could tour, which he didn't do. And that meant that in that changing world, the opportunity that he had, I think, to step out and redefine himself didn't really exist. If you were a Morrissey fan in late 1995, you either saw him supporting David Bowie, or you didn't because he pulled out of the tour, or you saw him in Helsinki or Japan. That was it. Those were your options. And that meant that the album was effectively stillborn, because at those days, touring sold albums. Albums didn't sell tours. There were very few live shows. The album peaked at 66 in the US, at 4 in the UK. And it was effectively over at that point. Morrissey was yesterday's man in the eyes of the press. Although Southpaw Grammar is a great album, it was born at the wrong time and it couldn't live on its own, which is why I think commercially it was a failure. Commercially, critically, it's not been well regarded, although the world has changed its view of it over time. But it's a good album, really, really good album. And by the way, if you're going to buy Southpaw Grammar, buy the original 1995 RCA issue. Don't buy the 2009 expanded Legacy edition, which not only copies the font typography and settings for David Bowie's Station to Station album, but also reflects the black and white cover that happens on them. This was an ugly cover as well. If you're a Morrissey fan and you were expecting either a picture of him in repose looking gorgeous and troubled, or you were expecting something like the Smiths with that particularly wonderful air of lost nostalgia in sepia, what instead you got was a photograph of a boxer from 1954 who was actually, I think, let me just check, I've got it written down somewhere in here. It was published, and it's a picture of a boxer from like a 1968 book. But this is not that. That's the rapping. The gift is something very different. This was a strong, aggressive album. Lyrically, it was very light. There was a lot of music. There wasn't so much in the way of lyrics. Morrissey had a cold when he was recording, so perhaps his vocals didn't feel as strident as perhaps you might expect. The lyrics were more direct. They were less arty. They were more autobiographical. And so the singing was more direct and there was less of it. The songs had more space to breathe. That, covered with this picture from Kenny Lane from the 1963 magazine The Ring, yes, I found the reference on my bit of paper, meant that this didn't feel like a Morrissey album at all. You look at the covers and the approach of let's say, Gene's Olympian album, Blur's Park Life, and then following that, The Great Escape, which was just about to come out, and Oasis, and this looked like it belonged to a different time. It was something dark and gritty. There was none of the sense of the grandfather of Britpop kind of reclaiming his throne from the Pretenders. It was more like a man that had gone off down a side road whilst everybody else was looking at him, wondering where the hell he's gone and wondering if he'd like to come back now, please. Because the world changes. And this is not a criticism of this album. This album is a really good album. It just came out at the wrong time and it wasn't appreciated at the time. You know, RCA rejected this sleeve because they didn't think it was good enough, but Morrissey insisted. And then 2 weeks after that, The Great Escape comes out. And then 2 weeks after that, What's the Story? Morning Glory comes out. There is no chance for this album to be as successful as Vauxhall and I at all. And, you know, opening with an 11-minute, 15-second song called The Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils, which, by the way, is built on a loop of Shostakovich Symphony No. 5 in D minor, doesn't exactly spread itself to being a knees-up umpire track like Charmless Man or Park Life or whatever. You know, you better cut down on your exercise and get some Park Life, mate, or something. You know, get some meat back into your breakfast. Meat is murder. This is a good album, really good. And The Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils is a great song, but it's the wrong song. It's the wrong album at the wrong time, and that's why it didn't survive. Obviously, The Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils was a continuation or a riposte to both Barbarism Begins at Home and The Headmaster Ritual. The idea and the concept behind it of actually turning on to what is it that the teachers are interested in. The teachers are now afraid of the pupils. If you say the wrong words, and we'll have you, and to be finished would be a relief. The idea of being finished is not just the end of the lesson, but also the concept of finishing, the completion of a task, the execution of an obligation. And I'm always reminded, actually, of the last scene from There Will Be Blood. Now, this is not a spoiler. That film is 18 years old now. It's old enough to vote. But the last word in the film is, I think I'm finished, and indicating very, very clearly that not only was the task over, but that the consequences of that task were that that particular person had reached the end and was finished, over, cancelled, even if you want to think about it in a certain context. So The Teachers Are Afraid of the Pupils is a role reversal of the earlier songs around. It's similar to the Station to Station title track, by the way, in so much as it's about 10-11 minutes long, huge instrumental ending, powerful music, and also I think an integral part of it is that it feels like it comes from a different time, like it doesn't come from 1995 at all. The other thing was corporal punishment in schools, I think, had been rolled out in about 1985. I think I got the cane once, not for long, not hard, but I did. And at the time I was like 10 or something. And the overwhelming burning thought that went through my mind when I did that was, I'm going to fucking get you. Because no matter what I've done, smacking a kid with a cane 6 times is not the way to win. Violence is often the failure of diplomacy, after all, which is one of the reasons in many of my disagreements with people I've never resorted to violence, but instead ridiculed them with words, which causes them occasionally to be violent, which is says a lot more about them than it does about anybody else. And talking of violence, of course, not only do we have boxers, not only do we have a picture of a boxer on the front, we have the title of the album, Southpaw Grammar. And that sums up, I think, the ethos of the whole era. Southpaw, in boxing parlance, is somebody who is left-handed. Approximately 10% of people in the UK are left-handed. I went out with a left-handed woman, actually, and I didn't even know she was so good at being ambidextrous until many years later when we were talking and she occasionally mentioned, oh yeah, I'm left-handed. I'm like, what? I had no idea. But also that Southpaw grammar being the language, this is the language of not fitting in, of being different to other people. And that runs through all Morrissey's work. And also this album, Southpaw Grammar, is the idea of going, this album is almost an instruction manual or a statement about what it's like to be a square peg in a round hole and not fit into the world in which you're in, a world which wants to collapse and crush your uniqueness and the rough edges that you've got around you and turn you into someone far more boring than you actually are. And if you think this is boring, just you wait until you see me talking about procurement regulations and the Procurement Act of 2023, including the various subsections, which, by the way, I'm not going to do on this because it's quite dull. Southpaw Grammar, then, is an album that, from its very title, about being queer in a straight world, makes very clear what it's all about. I think queer is a state of mind. It's not a sexuality or an orientation. Queer is feeling that, perhaps sometimes I fear that the whole world is queer, as David Bowie sang on the Buddha of Suburbia title track, but also the idea of operating at a different angle or a different plane of existence to most people. So the world that's around you seems baffling, weird, and doesn't really make sense because it's not built for the people like you and me. It's built for other people that prefer cars and golf. And that's okay. You can like that stuff. I don't. That's all right. Deep breath. Song 2 on the album, woohoo, is Reader Meet Author. And Reader Meet Author is a song that has been on my mind recently because, amongst other things, and this is a theme which Morrissey will also return to in other songs, including Speedway, is that lyric that sits there so safely with your software miles from the front line. You hear the way the sad voice sings, and you start to imagine things and any excuse to write more lies. Reader Meet Author is a song about how, for example, both, it's probably a pretty pointed riposte to Joe Rogan, who wrote Morrissey and Marr, The Severed Alliance, who I met on a book tour in, I think, 1995, but also around possibly Julie Burchill, who did an interview with him, but was so nervous, ended up antagonising him for most of the period of time and not really communicating with him in a valid fashion. It was described by Morrissey as, I think, as about the middle class not understanding the working class, not understanding the concepts of having to afford to be able to buy food, heating, etc. All of those type of things, and around how people can sit so safely in their software miles from the front lines and talk about things that they genuinely don't have any real experience about. And I'm thinking this in relation to the most recent president of the United States, although God knows how long it'll last, because when you're that full of cheeseburgers, your life expectancy does reduce. Is the idea of not understanding what it's like, that thing about, I want a president that was poor, I want a president that know what it's like to be gay, to run out of food, to not be able to afford to go to the hospital if you need to go to A&E, those type of things. And when you have people that have never had those experiences, they don't know what that's like because they've never felt the bite of the sharp teeth of poverty or of reality. The other thing with Reader Meet Author is it also talks about the gap between the public and the private existence. So there's a knowledge of privacy. So, for example, privacy is not the same as secrecy. Secrecy is hiding something that should be known. Privacy is having the ability to go around and live your own life without advertising it to absolutely everybody. And when people say you don't know anything about a situation or you're ignorant of a situation, it's often because knowledge and information is privileged, and not everybody needs to know everything about everything. So there's parts of my life I never talk about online because it's nobody's business, nor should I. And that's I've got to keep a part of my life for me, which belongs just to me and isn't for public consumption. And I'm specifically thinking about any relationships I may or may not be in, any people that I may or may not know, any medical treatments or medication that I might have. Not your business. Doesn't matter. What matters is that we have the right to live our lives, and we have the right to make decisions about our lives, and that includes, by the way, making decisions about how we live our lives when other people behave in ways that we don't agree with. So if we don't agree with somebody, we don't have to have that person in our lives if we don't want them to. And that's the source of I think, a difference of opinion that's ongoing at the moment. One of the key lyrics in Reader Meet Author, and only really turns out live, is when he sings, "Have you ever escaped a shipwrecked life?" Sometimes live he sings, "Have you ever escaped a Manchester life?" The idea of being assigned a fate at birth, and I was assigned a fate, which was that I would live in Birmingham and I'd marry a fairly average person, and I'd grow old and I'd have 2.4 children and a dog, and I'd work at either the chocolate factory or the HP sauce factory, which had a chimney in the shape of a HP sauce bottle, or I would work at the car factory, all three of which no longer exist as employment opportunities for me. So I would therefore have gone from one generation to being like the people that worked in the pits in Wales, effectively being relegated to nothingness. That is the options which we had. And so, but did you ever escape a Manchester life? And anybody that's moved away from home, anybody that's defied the expectations that were set upon you as a child, you've escaped from a Manchester life. You know what that's like. Track 3. I can't believe I'm 45 minutes into this and I'm only on track 3. Good God. This is like one of those very brief summations of a Phantom Menace, which lasts for 12 hours, is The Boy Racer, the second single released from the album, released on 2 CD singles, both featuring B-sides recorded at Drury Lane. This one features London and Billy Budd. This one features Spring Hill Gym and Why Don't You Find Out For Yourself. These, when they were released as singles, felt like contractual obligations, and I think it was the first time that Morrissey had indulged, and I think indulged is the word, in those dreadful 2 CD sets to push it a bit further up the charts. Why there were 3 trackers and not 4 trackers, I don't know. The songs existed. If you'd have put 4 trackers out, they would have been perhaps a little bit more interesting. But there we are. That's another decision for somebody else to make. And The Boy Racer didn't do particularly well in the charts. It got to number 36. And it talks about, again, the stereotypical male image, the boy racer standing at the urinal with the whole world in his hands. The idea of, with the whole world in his hands. The idea of, for example, what is it to be a man? The idea of womanizing. Tell me if you can, what makes a man, and the idea of culture existing in a vacuum. So this is one of the songs that very clearly talks about the nature of the masculine identity and whether you focus upon, whether you conform or whether you resist that, and whether you self-define who you are. And as I said, queer is a state of mind. So there are many different shades of grey. Life is not black and white, despite what all the great films of history tell you. Track 4, The Operation. Operation closes with one of the most dreaded words, or opens with one of the most dreaded things in human history, the drum solo. And it's a good drum solo by Spen. It's very good. But it doesn't sit in the song. It should sit somewhere else. I don't know where it should sit, but it really sucks the air out of the album. Maybe that should be the opening to side 2, is a 2-minute drum solo. Because obviously in the concept of vinyl LPs is you flip sides over and there you are. The Operation is a good song, actually. It's a song about a sense of alienated love, a gulf that cannot be breached between 2 people. And it's got a sense of experimentation that ran through these sessions. So this obviously was the third album, which was made by Morrissey with Alan and Boz. And it's just a really great record. The sense of experimentation is there. You can hear krautrock influences all through this album. So, for example, the ending of The Operation is a guitar, but it features Alan shouting through his pickup. A sense of something new and unusual being tried and attempted, new ground being broken. None of these songs are bad, by the way. Some are less good than others, but none of them are objectively bad. Not even the first single from the album, which is Dagenham Dave, and that takes its name from a song by the Stranglers, or at least it might do. Released in August 1995 at the height of the Blur and Oasis Britpop Wars, this was a song that was, again, out of time. The old guard were presenting themselves to us, but they were old. And the old part of it is what really, really showed through is if Dagger Them Dave would have been the first single by Blur, yeah, it would have done much better. It would have probably got to number one. Admittedly, it could have been a Blur song. It's a third-party character portrait of somebody that person has no direct experience of. By the way, that's Terry Venables on the front. So when the album launch party took place at the club that was owned by Terry Venables, that guy. And again, that focuses on a concept of, well, what is masculinity? And if you have a man in a football outfit poking his tongue out at you, that doesn't look like a standard and stereotypical male image, alongside the lyrics about I love Karen, I love Sharon written on the window screen, those type of things. It was a character study, but like some of the songs by Blur, it was a character study by someone who had financially exceeded by far the average earnings of most other people on the planet. Morrissey had a £200,000 merch deal. He signed £200,000 deal for the album, which was only really 2 months of recording. These were numbers that were far beyond the reach of somebody on an average salary of £15,000 a year. If you think about the average salary in the UK at the moment is around £28,000. That would be the equivalent of him getting £750,000 for an album. And when you live in that kind of atmosphere, irrespective of the fact that whether you employ people or not, you have a financial profile and an experience that's very different from lots of other people. It got to number 26 in the charts. It would never have done any better because it was Morrissey, and Morrissey was yesterday's news. Such a shame. But there you are. Not played live very often. I don't think I've seen him play it live, and I don't say that I miss it. We then have Do Your Best and Don't Worry, the last song that appeared in the sessions. It was added at the end, so Johnny had already finished. Boz played bass on it. It was a set opener for the Southpaw Grammar and 1997 shows. Do Your Best and Don't Worry is pretty good. Best Friend on the Payroll is better. It's somewhat autobiographical though. The idea of I turn the music down because this is my house, I don't know why. And then the lyric around living almost in a sitcom style, kind of, Terry and June, two old blokes living together. It's a great song. I actually really like Best Friend on the Payroll, but I don't think it was played live until 2009, which is a surprise. And then the last track on the album, Southpaw Grammar, the title track itself. It's a song about colour over composition and sound over song. It's about somebody not fitting in with the world. And it is very long. It's 10 minutes long. And it kind of descends and falls and collapses like a huge Jenga tower of sound into something where he starts to sing about running back to Ma. And then, the lyrics around, for example, just not fitting in to the reality that exists around him. Southpaw Grammar is a really, really, really good album. In its 1995 edition. It was an album that should have come out at a different time. It was just at odds with the times that it came out in. But that's not to say it was bad. It absolutely isn't. But the 2009 edition, the one that I think is currently available from RCA Records, is an abomination. And I'll explain why it's an abomination briefly. Firstly, the cover's changed. Secondly, the track listing has changed. Thirdly, director's cuts are not necessarily better. As anybody who's seen the atrocious director's cut of Donnie Darko will tell you, is sometimes less is more. And less is more is a lie in order to sell you more Big Small by less. So it's too long and there's too many songs, and what you take out is as important as what you keep in. So this has a different sequence. It opens with The Boy Racer. The teachers are afraid of the pupils. It's like the 10th track on the album. There's 3 previously unreleased songs on this. Honey, You Know Where to Find Me, Fantastic Bird, and You Should Have Been Nice to Me, which were also released on a 10-inch single, by the way, in 2020, with a picture disc with a cover of Diana Dawes on. But also, of those songs, Fantastic Bird was recorded in 1992, 3 years before the rest of the songs were recorded, with a different fucking lineup. It doesn't make sense being there. Fantastic Bird shouldn't be on the album. In fact, what should have happened, and this should happen with all of the Morrissey releases, is there should be a standard reissue of the standard original track listing in the original bloody order with no futzing about. And if you want to put bonus tracks on there, put them at the end of the album, and put the albums out in the original vinyl configuration with the original artwork that they were fucking released in, because that is a basic. Otherwise, it no longer becomes a song that belongs just to 1995. it becomes a bastardization. It becomes someone going back and like Leonardo da Vinci looking at the Mona Lisa and going, I think she needs a moustache. No, she doesn't. Leave it as it is. It was a perfect statement at the time. Leave it as it is. But of course I bought it because there's 3 unreleased Morrissey songs on. In fact, I think there's a total of 5. No, there's a total of 4 which haven't been on the album before. Nobody Loves Us, the B-side of Dagenham Dave, by the way. Fantastic song, played live many, many, many times. It's a beautiful song, and Morrissey calls it one of his best. And it should have been on the album because that Nobody Loves Us is about another one of the things, the common themes of the album, the shared belief in outsiderdom, us existing outside of the conventions of reality, creating our own reality. And as I was talking earlier about the album and Southpaw Grammar, the title itself indicating that it's actually a manual and a language about how to live differently in a right-handed world, or Flanders Leftorium. This is Nobody Loves Us is a key part of the album, and it should have been on it. Always should have been on the album, by the way. Take the drum solo for the operation off, put that on a 12-inch, stick Nobody Loves Us on the LP, it'll be much better. There's another B-side on Dagenham Dave, You Must Please Remember, which was originally a piano-based song building to an epic ending, but it was flattened and it was hardened and everything was turned into crunchy buzzsaw guitars to fit on the LP. As I said, this album is stillborn. It didn't work. There was the Bowie supporting tour in November 1995, plus the 2 headline shows in Japan. And between the 14th and the 27th of November, less than 2 weeks, that was the Southpaw Grammar tour in almost all of the world, hour-long sets at arenas to half-empty, half-apathetic audiences. And then there was these, I think there was a show in Helsinki, and I think there was 2 shows in Japan, and that was it. It was over. It was done. So you had the whole of the touring for this album in less than 2 weeks. And it's no wonder then that the album didn't land correctly, because it wasn't powered out of the cannon to go any further, just go bump onto the floor. There was another release, this time of outtakes, recorded during Vauxhall and I and the Boxer sessions, which came out in December 1995, the Sunny single. Here available on good old-fashioned British compact disc. Sunny and Black Eyed Susan and A Swallow on My Neck should have been released on the World of Morrissey compilation as fan bait, but no, they were issued as a single. So Morrissey was in the strange and unusual position of having a single released in December 1995 and 4 weeks earlier having a single released on a different label. And is it any wonder that neither of them could really be bloody bothered with it? And so for my eyes, Sunny always comes after Boxers. Sunny is a song to a missing person, effectively almost kind of like a follow-on from London. Did you see the jealousy in the eyes of the ones that you had to leave behind? And also from it was a lyric that was taken from it alludes to heroin in the 3rd verse. And it was originally the 4th track on the Boxers EP, but also it kind of reverts back to and talks to, I think probably We'll Let You Know, and National Front Disco is, we've lost our boy, where is our boy? Those type of things around people that lose contact with their parents. Black Eyed Susan, the 2nd track, fantastic, apart from the fact that the 3rd verse has been taken out and replaced with an experimental 2-minute sound collage of the band members futzing about. And then A Swallow on My Neck, which has a very homoerotic title, A Swallow on the Neck, indicating both fast fists in boxing parlance, but also, because of the speed at which they move, but also a homoerotic undertone. Also covered in Faith No More's song Be Aggressive, I Swallow, I Swallow, I Swallow. And it's a good song, should have been better known. These 3 songs were wasted on this EP. There was never any home for them, and they just kind of disappeared. What we did have, though, with this whole period is a very assertive, very physical, very almost aggressive sound that moved towards the sound of guitars, moved away from melodies, was keener and faster and harder than anything Morrissey had done before. Even Your Arsenal had light and shade. This just had shade, and what a lot of it. And it was beautiful. It's a really great record. I've really grown into liking it, but it wasn't the album that perhaps it could have been at the time it came out. there was a sense at the time of a man who was vastly at odds with the world around him, about sound and fury signifying nothing, a featureless sound of guitars through rote repetition, a lyrical emptiness, a bland, empty, almost hypocritical sense. And by the way, those aren't my views. Those are the views which I sensed at the time from people. Go, Morrissey, yesterday's news. And that, then of course, be careful who you write off as yesterday's news, because tomorrow always comes. In conclusion then, Southpaw Grammar, I think is a really good LP. It came out at the wrong time. It didn't land correctly. It wasn't popular. It just was the wrong record at the wrong time, and it didn't. And Morrissey himself did no favours in how he presented it to the world. But what we did have instead is something that now, with a 30-year break, I'm confident in saying is actually very underrated, and in its original RCA edition, I strongly recommend. That takes us to an hour and about 2 minutes. If you've made it all the way through to the end, congratulations, have a biscuit. And as always, be excellent to each other, which, by the way, was pointed out by a viewer, Simon, who I saw for a drink and a natter on Sunday. Good to see you, and thanks for watching. And of course, to everyone else, thanks for watching. But as always, follow the Tao of Bill and Ted. Be excellent to each other. Take care of yourselves. And as the words of Alan Fluff Freeman, if you love somebody, tell them before it's too late. Remember, whatever happens, I love you. Or do I? Who knows? Well, there's a whole bunch of other stuff to come. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all soon. Now, I'm going to sit on the sofa, and I think I'm going to have biscuits. How exciting. Have you ever escaped from a NOTCAST life? Who knows? Right. Bye. See you soon.